Malcolm Reed, a self-made titan, believed in one principle: grit. Work hard and you reap the rewards. He paid his employees a fair wage, expected dedication, and never pried into their lives after they clocked out. That was until one night. A dedicated employee, Naomi Hayes, lingered late, grabbing a takeout container like it was a hidden treasure. He followed her home, an action that shattered his perception of success and the sacrifices people made. For the first time, he questioned if hard work alone was enough. Malcolm Reed had built Reed Logistics from the ground up. No inheritance, no safety net, just relentless effort and an unwavering belief in discipline. His trucking operation, born in Atlanta, Georgia, had morphed into an industry powerhouse, with fleets crisscrossing the nation. People respected, even feared him. He was known for meeting deadlines and pushing his team, but always with fair compensation. At Reed Logistics, winning was the only option, yet even a man like Malcolm had blind spots. For you, a free like is easy, but for me it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much. That night, as he reviewed quarterly metrics in his glass-walled office, something caught his eye. The building was nearly empty, save for the cleaning crew. In the dimly lit break room, a figure remained: Naomi Hayes. He recognized her as a diligent worker, always taking on extra shifts, never asking for favors. That's why what he saw next felt off. Naomi stood near the food counter, hesitant, shifting her weight. The cafeteria had closed hours ago, yet she approached the cook, a man Malcolm barely knew. Their conversation was hushed, but the cook's furrowed brow and hesitation before retrieving a takeout container from beneath the counter spoke volumes. Naomi's shoulders relaxed in relief as she murmured a thank you, quickly stuffing the container into her oversized tote bag, glancing around to see if anyone had noticed. She then hurried towards the exit, head down, pace quick. Malcolm leaned back, fingers tented, staring at the empty cafeteria. He wasn't one to meddle in his employees' personal lives. Work hard, get paid. Simple, fair. But Naomi worked more than most. She pulled double, sometimes triple shifts. If anyone deserved a decent meal, it was her. So why did she have to ask? The question gnawed at him. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she forgot her wallet. Maybe she was saving for something big. Maybe it wasn't his business. Yet, as he looked at his reports, the numbers blurred. All he could see was Naomi, hiding a takeout container like it was something forbidden. What if there was more to it? Malcolm wasn't impulsive, but as he stood, rolling up his sleeves, he found himself moving. By the time he stepped outside, the night air was crisp, and Naomi was already heading towards the bus stop. No car, no ride, just her and the weight on her back. Malcolm hesitated. This was crossing a line. Yet, when the bus arrived and Naomi boarded, he followed. The bus rattled forward, its dim lights flickering, casting harsh flashes across the mostly empty seats. Malcolm sat in the back, watching. Naomi sat near the middle, slumped, head against the cold window. She looked exhausted, not just tired, but bone-weary. The city blurred by. Neon gas stations, warm diner windows, endless headlights. As the bus moved away from the business district, the landscape changed. Buildings grew smaller, streets darkened, sidewalks cracked. And uneven. The storefronts replaced with boarded-up windows and chain-link fences. Malcolm realized then that he'd never been to this part of Atlanta. Not really. It existed on the same maps, but it was a different world. Naomi barely moved. She didn't check her phone. She didn't fidget. She just stared out the window with a quiet acceptance that stirred unease within him. How many nights had she done this? How many times had she ridden this same bus, taken this same route home after working shifts that should have been impossible? The bus slowed. Naomi pulled the stop cord without hesitation, like she'd done it 1,000 times. As the doors hissed open, she adjusted the strap of her tote bag, pulled her thin jacket tighter and stepped onto the sidewalk. Malcolm hesitated. This was going too far, but his feet moved anyway. He exited a few paces behind her, keeping his distance, his hands shoved into the pockets of his tailored coat. The air smelled like rain on pavement, damp and heavy. Streetlights flickered, some working, some not. The houses here weren't abandoned, but they weren't well kept either. Paint peeled from the siding, mailboxes leaned at odd angles. The kind of place where people didn't expect much, where survival came before comfort. Naomi walked with purpose, even in exhaustion. She turned a corner, past a row of rusted railings and dimly lit porches, until she reached a small apartment complex, one that had clearly seen better days. She climbed the stairs to the second floor, pulled out her keys and pushed open the door. Malcolm slowed his steps, stopping just before the building. Through the thin, yellowed curtains, he saw it. The apartment was bare. Not the kind of bare where someone had just moved in, but the kind where someone had been living with nothing for a long time. No couch, no dining table, no signs of comfort. Just a single mattress on the floor, a few blankets, a plastic crate with neatly folded clothes stacked on top. And then 2 small heads peeked out from the side of the mattress. Children. Malcolm's stomach tightened. Naomi knelt beside them, her movements slow but careful, her exhaustion pushed aside the moment she saw their faces. She set the takeout container on the floor, opening it with deliberate gentleness, like it was something fragile. The kids, a boy and a girl no older than 5 or 6, scooted forward immediately, eyes wide, movements quick. Not the casual reach of kids grabbing a snack, but the urgent kind of hunger, the kind that came from waiting too long. She split the meal between them, making sure each got an equal share. But she didn't eat. She just watched. Malcolm stood there, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had spent years building a business, pushing employees to work harder, faster, longer. But had he ever really looked at them? Had he ever stopped to consider what happened after they clocked out? Naomi wasn't just working double shifts. She was surviving them. A gust of wind swept down the street, rattling a loose metal sign nearby. Malcolm took a step back, his mind racing, his chest tight. He needed to leave. This wasn't his business. He had already seen too much. But as he turned, a small voice cut through the night. "Mummy, are we going to have breakfast tomorrow?" Malcolm froze. Naomi hesitated just for a second. Then, with quiet certainty, she smoothed her daughter's curls back from her face and whispered, "Of course, baby. I'll figure it out." She smiled, but Malcolm saw it for what it was. It wasn't real. It was a shield, a fragile thing meant to comfort someone else, not herself. And just like that, something inside him shifted, because this wasn't just an unfortunate situation. This was a broken system, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if just working hard was enough to fix it. The next morning, Malcolm sat at his desk, staring at his laptop screen. But the numbers blurred into meaningless shapes. For the first time in years, work didn't hold his focus. His mind was somewhere else, in a dimly lit apartment, on a cold floor, watching 2 hungry children eat from a takeout container their mother had to ask for. He had spent the night turning it over in his head, trying to rationalize it, trying to convince himself that he had no obligation to get involved. Naomi had a job. She worked hard. He paid his employees fairly. If she was struggling, that wasn't on him. That was life. That was the way the world worked. Except that logic felt hollow now. A soft knock at his office door pulled him back. His assistant peered inside, her expression unreadable. "Naomi Hayes is here to see you," she said. Malcolm straightened, his expression smoothing into something neutral. He had spent the past hour debating whether he should be the one to call her in, wondering if there was a way to bring up what he had seen without making her defensive. But now she was here of her own choice. That meant something. Send her in. The door opened, and Naomi stepped inside, moving like someone bracing for. She looked just as exhausted as the night before, but there was something else in her eyes now. A quiet weariness, a hesitation that hadn't been there before. She sat across from him, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture too rigid, too controlled. "You wanted to see me, sir." Her voice was steady, professional, not a hint of emotion. Malcolm studied her for a long moment, debating how to start. He had rehearsed a dozen different ways to approach this, but now, sitting across from her, none of them felt right. So finally he just said it. "I saw you last night." Naomi stiffened. It was slight, barely noticeable, but Malcolm caught it. "Excuse me? I followed you home." The words came out even, careful, but there was no easy way to say it. Her reaction was instant, a sharp inhale, a flicker of something across her face, confusion, then anger, then something colder. Her fingers curled into fists, but she didn't move, didn't lash out. I don't understand," she said, but her voice had changed. It wasn't steady anymore. It was tight, controlled, like someone trying not to panic. "I saw you take that food home," Malcolm continued, keeping his voice calm, steady, giving her space. "I saw your apartment, your kids." Her breath hitched, and just like that, the wall came up. Her expression shuttered. Her shoulders squared, and suddenly the woman sitting in front of him wasn't just Naomi Hayes, his employee. She was a mother protecting her children, a fighter refusing to break, someone who had been through this conversation before and knew exactly how to handle it. "This isn't," she started, shaking her head, already preparing her defense. "I don't need." "I'm not here to judge you," Malcolm interrupted, leaning forward slightly, "and I'm not here to pity you either." Naomi looked at him then, really looked at him, as if trying to gauge whether or not he was lying. She was used to being dismissed, used to being told to work harder, used to people looking at her and seeing a problem instead of a person. "I'm here because I should have seen it sooner," Malcolm said, "and I want to fix it." Naomi swallowed hard, blinking rapidly, like she was trying to keep herself from showing too much. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "Yes, I do," Malcolm said firmly. Silence settled between them, thick and heavy. For the first time, she didn't have an answer. Malcolm reached into his desk drawer, pulling out a thick envelope, and slid it across the desk toward her. Naomi's eyes flicked to it, but she didn't move. "This isn't charity," Malcolm said before she could protest. "This is an investment in you, in the people who make this company run." She didn't reach for it. "I want to raise wages," he continued, "provide better hours, childcare support, emergency assistance." His voice was steady, but there was urgency in it now, something raw, something real. "I need your help to do it the right way, to make sure no one else has to go home the way you did last night." Naomi's lips parted, but no words came out. Her fingers hovered over the envelope, then drew back as if burned. "Why?" she finally asked. It wasn't accusing, it wasn't doubtful, it was just tired. Malcolm exhaled. "Because I built this company," he said, "and I let people fall through the cracks. I refuse to let that happen again." Naomi stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached forward, her fingers grazing the envelope before gripping it tightly. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She wasn't used to accepting help. She wasn't used to anyone even offering it. Malcolm met her gaze, his own unwavering. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." Naomi swallowed hard, then finally she nodded. A moment later she stood, shoulders squared, as she held the envelope to her chest, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope. Malcolm watched her walk out, something solid and unshakable settling deep in his bones. This wasn't just about fixing a company, this was about changing lives, and he was just getting started. The door clicked shut behind Naomi, leaving Malcolm alone in the silence of his office. He exhaled slow and steady, his hands pressed flat against the desk as he stared at the space where she had just been. Something inside him felt different, something heavy, something permanent. There was no going back from this. The realization sat deep in his chest, heavier than he expected. He had spent years believing that hard work was the answer to everything, that success was a simple equation. Effort in, results out. But last night had cracked that belief wide open. Naomi had done everything right. She worked more than most, she never asked for help, and still she had to beg for a meal. That wasn't failure on her part, that was failure on his. Malcolm let out a sharp breath, pushing back from his desk. His office, once a symbol of everything he had built, suddenly felt suffocating. He needed action, a plan, a solution. His finger moved on instinct, dialing a number he rarely used. The call barely rang before a sharp, professional voice answered. "Malcolm," Lisa Carter, his chief financial officer, greeted. "One clipped. Didn't expect to hear from you before our board meeting next week. What's on your mind?" Malcolm didn't hesitate. "I need to talk payroll, benefits, emergency assistance programs, and I need to talk about it today." There was a pause on the line, then a low exhale. "You're not the type to make impulsive decisions," Lisa said carefully. "What happened?" Malcolm's jaw clenched. He wasn't sure he could explain it. The weight in his chest, the way Naomi's quiet exhaustion had settled in his mind like a splinter that wouldn't budge. But he had built this company with Lisa from the ground up. If there was anyone who would understand, it was her. "Let's just say I finally saw something I should have seen a long time ago." Another pause, then the sound of keys clicking on a keyboard. "All right," Lisa said. "Tell me what you're thinking." Malcolm inhaled deeply, forcing his thoughts into something structured, something real. "We need to raise wages," he started, his voice firm. "I don't care how we do it, but we need to make it happen. And not just a couple of cents to keep up with inflation. I mean something real, something that actually changes lives." Lisa let out a low hum, the kind that told him she was already running numbers in her head. "That's a big shift, Malcolm. We've got investors watching margins. There's going to be pushback." "Let them push," Malcolm said. "We're a logistics company, Lisa. We move product, we keep the supply chain alive. And the only reason we do it so damn well is because of the people on the ground. The ones in the warehouses, the ones in the trucks, the ones who pull 16-hour shifts and don't complain. I built this company on the belief that hard work pays off. But what if it doesn't? What if we're taking more than we're giving?" Lisa didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her voice had shifted, no longer skeptical but thoughtful, calculating. "You're dead serious about this?" "Dead serious." Another pause, then more typing. "All right," Lisa said. "Then let's do it. We'll start with the numbers. I'll put together models on wage increases, see where we can shift funds without gutting the bottom line. You want to talk benefits too?" "Yes," Malcolm said immediately. "Childcare assistance, emergency support, maybe even tuition help for people who want to move up. I don't want band-aid fixes, Lisa. I want long-term solutions." Lisa let out a quiet laugh, not mocking but surprised, maybe even impressed. "Well, damn, looks like somebody had a wake-up call." Malcolm rubbed a hand over his jaw, exhaling through his nose. "Yeah, something like that." "All right," Lisa said. "Give me a few hours. I'll have a preliminary report by the end of the day. But Malcolm, if we do this, you know it's going to be a fight, right? The board, the investors, even some of the managers, they're not all going to be on your side." Malcolm's grip tightened around his phone. He thought of Naomi sitting in his office, her hands clenched in her lap, her voice barely above a whisper when she said, "You don't have to do this." "Then we fight," Malcolm said. Lisa chuckled. "Damn right we do." "I'll call you when I have numbers." The line went dead. Malcolm exhaled, leaning back in his chair. But for the first time in a long time, the weight in his chest didn't feel like pressure, it felt like purpose. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about doing the right thing. And for the first time in his career, Malcolm Reed was about to bet everything on the people who made his company what it was. The boardroom was silent, the kind of silence that felt sharp-edged with tension, thick with unspoken resistance. Malcolm sat at the head of the long glass table, his fingers steepled in front of him. eyes steady as he took in the faces around him. Men in pressed suits, women in sharp blazers, people who had spent years analysing numbers but had never once set foot in a warehouse, never clocked in for a back-to-back shift, never had to choose between rent and food. Lisa sat beside him, her expression unreadable, but Malcolm knew her well enough to sense the calculation running behind her eyes. She had come prepared. She always did. Reports printed, spreadsheets color-coded, projections mapped out. Every possible argument against what they were about to do had already been dissected and countered. But that didn't mean the fight would be easy. Across the table, Daniel Grant, one of their longest-standing investors, cleared his throat, leaning back in his chair like a man who had already decided he didn't like what he was about to hear. "Malcolm, let me make sure I understand this correctly. You're proposing an across-the-board wage increase, more benefits, a fund for emergency assistance, and you want us to approve this. Why?" Malcolm exhaled through his nose. "Because it's the right thing to do." A beat of silence, then a scoff from someone on the right. "Come on, Malcolm," Daniel said, shaking his head. "We don't run a charity, we run a business. Our employees are already paid competitively for this industry. If we start handing out raises like candy, where does it end? And what do you think the shareholders are going to say when our profit margins take a hit?" Malcolm's jaw tightened. He could feel the weight of the room pressing down on him, the skepticism so thick it was almost tangible. But he had prepared for this. He had spent the past week poring over numbers, sitting in long meetings with Lisa, running through every possible rebuttal. This wasn't just emotion. This was logic. This was strategy. This was the future. "We run a logistics company," Malcolm said, his voice even but firm. "We don't make products. We don't develop new technology. We move things. And the only reason we do it better than anyone else is because of the people on the ground, the ones loading the trucks, driving through the night, pulling extra shifts just to keep this business running. They're not numbers on a spreadsheet, they're people. And right now, they're being left behind." Lisa slid a report across the table. "We've run the numbers," she said. "Yes, this plan will cost us up front, but turnover rates, those are killing us faster than any wage increase ever could. The time and money we spend constantly hiring, constantly training, it's bleeding this company dry. Retention is the key to growth, and if we invest in our employees now, they'll invest in us long term." Another board member, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, frowned at the report but didn't dismiss it outright. "You're telling us this is about sustainability." "It's about survival," Malcolm said. "You think competition is bad now? Give it a few years. If we don't build loyalty now, we're done. We can either be the company people want to work for, or we can be the company people leave the second a better offer comes along." The room fell into another uncomfortable silence. Malcolm could see the gears turning, could see some of them already doing the mental math, weighing risk versus reward. Some of them would never be convinced, but some were listening. Daniel folded his arms, his lips pressed into a thin line. "And what if this doesn't work? What if all we do is lose money?" Malcolm leaned forward, holding his gaze unshaken. "Then I take the loss personally." That got their attention. Lisa's head snapped toward him, but she didn't say anything. Not yet. The rest of the board, however, murmured in low, surprised tones. Daniel narrowed his eyes. "You're saying you'll cut your own salary?" "If that's what it takes," Malcolm said, and he meant it, every word. "I built this company. If we fail, I take responsibility. But I'm telling you, we won't, because I believe in this. I believe in them. And if I'm willing to put my own paycheck on the line for it, then you better start asking yourselves why you're not." Another silence. Then, finally, the woman with the silver hair, her name was Catherine, one of their oldest investors, sighed and pushed the report back toward Lisa. "I think," she said slowly, carefully, It's time we start thinking about more than just the next quarter. I vote yes. Lisa's fingers tapped once against the table, subtle, but Malcolm caught the small sign of victory. One by one, the votes fell into place. Not unanimous, not without resistance, but enough. Enough to change everything. By the time the meeting ended, Malcolm stepped out of the boardroom into the hallway, the weight in his chest finally lifting. Lisa walked beside him, glancing up at him with a knowing look. "When you said you were serious," she muttered, "I didn't think you meant your own damn salary." Malcolm let out a low breath. "It worked, didn't it?" Lisa shook her head, but he caught the small smirk she tried to hide. "Yeah," she admitted. "It did." They stopped near the elevators, the hum of the office filling the space around them. Outside the glass walls, employees moved through their day, loading shipments, answering calls, keeping the company alive in ways the board would never fully understand. Malcolm looked out over them, his jaw set, his conviction solid. It wasn't just about one woman anymore. It wasn't just about Naomi. It was about all of them. Every worker who had ever pulled a double shift. Every driver who had ever missed a holiday. Every person who had ever worked themselves into the ground just to scrape by. For years he had believed in hard work. He still did. But now he believed in something more. "All right," Lisa said, crossing her arms. "Now that we've got approval, who's telling the employees?" Malcolm exhaled, rolling his shoulders back. "I am." Lisa raised a brow. "You sure? This is going to be a shock." "Yeah," Malcolm said, nodding, already stepping forward, already ready for the fight ahead. "And I want them to hear it from me." Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.